Sri Lanka holds a crucial presidential election on September 21st, the economically troubled Indian Ocean island nation is staring at multifarious challenges, the chief among them being its serious debt crisis. The spectacularly beautiful tropical island nation of 22 million people has to decide whether it wants to radically detach itself from the political uncertainties since 2020 or just make incremental changes. A severely weakened economy, high corruption, endemic poverty, and persistent unemployment are the main issues at play before the three main contenders, the incumbent President Ranil Wickramasinghe, Anura Kumara Dissanayake from the Janatha Vimukthi Peramuna party, and Sajith Premadasa of the Samagi Jana Balawegaya party. Mayank Chhaya Reports spoke to journalist and documentary filmmaker Beena Sarwar, who recently made a critically acclaimed documentary, Democracy in Debt, Sri Lanka Beyond the Headlines. Beena Sarwar. Welcome to Mayank Chhaya Reports, Beena. It's always a pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Mayank. Always a pleasure to chat with you.
We are just a day away from a major election in Sri Lanka, a country about which you made a documentary called about Sri Lanka's debt, in fact, Beyond the Headlines. So I'm keen to know what impressions you've come back with as the country prepares to elect a new leadership.
So I was there in May and then I was again there in July. And there was a lot of disillusionment, I think, with the political system, with the current state of politics. The farmers I interviewed for my documentary in the northwest, in Anuradhapura, they were the people who had earlier been Rajapaksa supporters. And now there is no way they are going to vote for anybody associated with that party.
No, but in terms of the situation in Sri Lanka, I was watching a documentary. There is a great deal of complaining about the way the economy has been handled, not just now, but over the last maybe 2.5, 3 decades. Do you think the election will change that?
So one of the people I spoke to, Dr. Dushni Virakun, of the Institute of Policy Studies, she actually says that this is something that's not, it didn't happen overnight and it's not going to change overnight. It's not, and everybody, I mean, that anybody sensible will know this is not something that will, it took decades to create this mess. It's not going to go away overnight. So it is going to have to be a long, slow process, and they have to take the steps. And Dr. Virakun's fear was that whichever government comes in, so now that they've started the road to recovery, whatever you might think about Ranil Wickramasinghe, who some people are calling Ranil Rajapaksa because of his close association with the Rajapaksas, but he did set the country on the path to recovery. He did institute policies that have, taken it out of that hole and on the road to recovery. Unfortunately, I don't think he has much of a chance of coming in. I'm saying unfortunately because the fear is that whoever comes in will dismantle what he started, because that is unfortunately that's the thing in our countries, that they don't follow policies. They just they play power games.
Right.
And what they need to do is look at what's for the good of the country, what they need to do. And if these policies are working, then carry on the policies, even if it is started by a political opponent whose views you don't like. That would be the mature thing to do. So one can only hope that whoever comes into power now will carry on those policies and not disband them all just because they were started by the previous government.
Speaking of which, I was reading a piece by our common friend Sugiswara Senadira in South Asia Monitor this morning, where he indicates that, I mean, there's no clear sign. It seems to be equally divided. They still
Yes.
don't know who might make it.
Exactly.
I mean, maybe Vikramasinghe has some edge because he has had some record of having put things on
Yeah.
somewhat right track. But again, it's a touch and go affair.
We just don't know. And
Yeah,
that's the thing with elections, and that's the thing we've seen with elections in India, we saw recently as well.
right.
Whatever anybody, I think that the political pundits and those who try to predict, they end up being quite wrong most of the time. And I was reading in Himal magazine, Himal South Asian, Marlon Arya Singh, another common friend, who's also associated with our South Asia Peace Action Network and with Sapan News. And he said that, in previous elections, they've had these, the astrologers coming on to predict. And this time that is conspicuously missing in the Sri Lanka, in the run up to the elections. This time the astrologers are not coming out to predict, because I think everybody's afraid they're going to get wrong, because we just don't know.
The protest movement of 2020, right?
2022.
2022, I'm sorry. That for a while it promised that it would perhaps upend the long entrenched orthodoxies of the country, but it didn't really quite happen because the same bunch of people came back. I mean, Ranil Wickramasinghe has been around forever. I
Yes.
first reported on him over 30 years ago when he was contesting. So it's still the same. So what's your expectation of the election doing anything fundamentally, changing anything at all?
Yeah, so as you know, I mean, elections don't constitute democracy. Elections are just part of the process of democracy. People go out and vote, they elect a government, and that's what the title of my documentary is: Democracy in Debt, Sri Lanka Beyond the Headlines. And the debt is that the leaders they don't come in, which they should come in, as servants of the people. They should be servant leaders, and they should come in with the attitude that people have given us this loan of power, and we have to work to repay that debt instead of enriching our own pockets. And that doesn't happen in South Asia. That's why we are seeing that the elections are seen as a way to come in and to quickly make up whatever you lost, in your campaign, whatever you spent in your campaign. So the politicians who, if anybody comes in with the genuine, and I don't actually, to be honest, see that in the current lineup of like serving the people. Maybe the Vikramasinghe has that a little bit because he has done that in the last couple of years that he's been there. But there is still a lot of perceptions there's a lot of corruption. When I was there, when we traveled, to remote areas, the roads were very good, but there is a perception that they've also lined pockets.
Right.
There've been kickbacks and things. So there is this perception, and they have to, whoever comes in, they have to really have to care their way. Whether they do or they don't, who knows? But they need to. That would be very nice, but maybe that would be very utopian if they actually came in to serve and to actually keep the country's best interests in mind, and not just political victimization, or showing who's boss and all that. I spoke to I've been talking to people in Sri Lanka, and there's a great fear that if a certain party comes in, there would be repercussions on the like, and this has happened before, when a party has come in, and they have been very vicious towards people, especially in the public figure who opposed them. Like, I think there was a musician, a singer, who had his house was vandalized, the woman he was with was raped, that kind of thing had happened before has happened before. They're just for supporting somebody. When
Right.
the winning party comes in, they're like, well, we're going to show you. So it's very unfortunate. I hope that does not happen.
Yeah. Well, serving people is incident to politics, not just in South Asia, but across the world, even in the country where we live right now, in the US. The kind of issues that you keep hearing, at least from the Republican side, have nothing to do with people largely. So I suppose it's not unique to South Asia, but since America has had a long record of prosperity, I suppose some of those things get glossed over, unlike in India or Pakistan or Sri Lanka or Bangladesh and elsewhere. In terms of two major powers having any shadow, casting any looming shadows on Sri Lanka vis-a-vis China and India, what's your sense?
In terms of power, well,
In,
so
in
right
terms
now,
of Sri Lanka's political process, do you think they have any even subtle presence the
well,
way?
I think you can see the parties that, or the personalities of parties that India is backing or that America is backing. China, I think, is like not really making that very clear, which I think is the smart thing to do. Because you really have to leave it to the people and not try to influence the vote, which unfortunately the major powers don't do that. And in India, of course, is really does not want to lose its influence over the pearl of South Asia. And
Yeah.
what I found, one of the things I found very worrying when I was there, disturbing, is the influence of the Hindutva right wing into the northern part of Sri Lanka, building large temples, bringing in that particular kind of Hinduism that Sri Lanka's polity is not does not they don't like that, but that those encroachments are being made.
Yeah, but that's, I mean, we've talked about this. That's very, very peripheral. It has no political consequence
It it
yet.
is it is peripheral. It is
Yeah.
peripheral, but and I doubt that it will lead to any major thing.
No, it's
But
unlikely because Buddhism is so deeply entrenched and Buddhism is so deeply political in Sri Lanka.
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
that's
you
true.
have Buddhist monks who have been violent, so it's nothing very.
True, true, true.
Uh,
Yeah. I
so
mean,
it's
no religion has a monopoly either on
yeah,
violence
yeah,
or on non-violence, and although they all
absolutely,
teach humanism and all that, but that we
yeah,
don't
yeah.
see that
But
actually happening.
that's a subject that needs to be dismissed with,
Yeah,
in my judgment, contempt because it's not something that I would even engage with on
yeah,
earth.
yeah, yeah. No, it was just a. It is, as you said, peripheral, but it is like it kind of shows how people try to influence other
Yes,
societies and all that. But the
yes,
other thing I think another, I think, common thread between what's happening in Sri Lanka and elsewhere, and you can see these patterns, like say in India and America particularly, and also in Pakistan. I think I'm not so sure about Bangladesh, but sort of this anti-intellectualism, this resentment towards the political elite, uh, the pe- people sort of coming saying that you have grabbed power for too long, or you have been you have looked down upon us, you have not considered us, you don't see us, you don't hear us. And what has happened is that social media over the last 15 years has given a platform to people who, so that instead of trying to elevate themselves and develop more complex um, ways of thinking, uh, they are getting entrenched in binaries and simplifications, and appreciating someone who will speak down as if he's talking in 6-year-old language, like
correct.
simplifications and slogans and simplifications and that kind of thing. So then that becomes a big um, it becomes a big draw for a lot of people who feel threatened by more complex ideas and thinking.
Yeah. And to wrap up, Beena, what's your sense about the huge problem of chronic debt in Sri Lanka? Because that's the focus of your critically acclaimed documentary. Do you think the political classes in Sri Lanka are sensitive to that aspect and they are really focused on that in the way they should be?
I think so. I think that they are very conscious of the fact that this should not happen again. But again, like I said, that will require the kind of maturity to continue policies that are working and not throw the baby out with the bathwater. I
Right.
think, but we don't know right now. We don't know who's going to come in. We don't know what kind of whether they will show the political maturity that is required to take the country forward, or whether they will let it descend back into some kind of chaos, or like trying to political vendettas and victimizations and things. So I just really hope that, I mean, I do think that there has been a lot of, I think Sri Lanka has moved forward since that nearly 30-year war, that really bloody violence, the violence that the JVP inflicted, the 70s and 80s, and how the state responded to them. Hundreds of, thousands of, people, the way that the kind of atrocities. But in the 2022, since that crisis, yes, there are human rights violations, and human rights lawyers, that some of whom I spoke to, are working to counteract those things. But there wasn't that kind of violence that we had seen before.
Right.
There was political repression. They did shut down the protests, the Argalaya, but it wasn't that kind of violence that we'd seen in the past. So maybe there is a recognition that dialogue and inclusivity, and treating people in a more
Right.
mature way, behaving in a more mature way, maybe is a better way to go.
On that note, Beena, I want to thank you for your time. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you so much, Mayank. Likewise.